All right, good evening. I'm 1 minute early, so I wanted to go online early so that I could get ready to share this page before we start in 1 minute. We start at 9 p.m. For those of you who are watching this replay, that's what's happening. We're 1 minute before. And because I am a Sabbath school person, I believe in being on time, like all Sabbath school people are early, and at the latest they are on time. So we'll start in just a minute. And for those of you who are watching this replay, I want to welcome you to our first Sabbath School Teachers meeting for this quarter. For those of you who are new to what's happening, we did this last year, third quarter, and I decided to pick it up again this quarter, and it's a fascinating study we're having this quarter, and we're studying the book of Daniel. And for some teachers, there could be some intimidation because when we hear Daniel and the Revelation, we sometimes get intimidated. But it's really a great lesson, and I've sort of thumbed through it. Hey, Darlene, my sister's online. Are you teaching this week? Let me know if you are. My sister goes to a church out in Douglasville, Georgia, which is about an hour from me. She's really involved in that church there and their community services, and she teaches on occasion. So I'm welcoming everyone to our session tonight. I'll give a little update about how the session is going to run, and just kind of catch up as we see different names join who were with us last year. It sounds strange saying last year we were together, and it's the 9th of January, and for some reason to me it seems a lot further into the year. Maybe with so much drama going on in our world, every day is just filled with things that are just all consuming, and there's a lot of pain and suffering going on in Australia. Many of my friends in Australia who I had the privilege of going there on 2 occasions for Sabbath school, and my heart goes out to them because they're in a situation where they are almost powerless, and these fires are just ravaging, just acres after acres, and it's just a very sad situation. And then with the plane crash in Iran, it's just on all sides. And I'm just glad that we could come away, and this quarter is really a good opportunity for us to see that in the grand scheme of things, God is in control. While we're in the moment, it's hard for us to make any sense out of what's happening because some of it is senseless. But as we study the book of Daniel, and as we go through these prophecies, we will be reminded that God is in control of this thing, that He inhabits eternity, which is longer than our world's existence. And by God's grace, all of us will be there. So great, darling. I'm glad you're teaching this coming Sabbath. Okay, well, let me just kind of get started. My name is Curtis Hall. You should know that by now. My ministry is Sabbath School Coaching. I have been doing Sabbath School ministry training officially for 10 years now. I officially launched in 2010, even though I was doing some training at my home church. But I officially launched our ministry in 2010. Since that time, I've had the privilege of working with scores of churches. I really can't even keep up with how many churches I've been invited to. So I have seen Sabbath school from a vantage point that few people have. That's why I'm invited to see Sabbath school when I go to all these churches, and I get to talk to Sabbath school teachers and superintendents, not only in the U.S., but across the world. And as you, if you've been in Sabbath school for some time, as you can attest to, that Sabbath school is challenged. And that's just being kind with the words. In many of our churches, Sabbath school is nearly dead. There are some pockets of the world where the culture drives Sabbath school. But here in the States and many other places where I travel, things have changed significantly, where Sabbath school is not seen to be as something that is vital to be a part of. That is partly our fault as Sabbath school leaders and teachers, because I have found, and the evidence shows, that many times we have refused to adapt to our audience. That we have been doing Sabbath school for a certain way for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and we can no longer do Sabbath school that way. So my specialty is in adult class teachers. This past weekend, I was blessed to hold a Sabbath school workshop at my home church, which is the Alpharetta, Georgia Seventh-day Adventist Church in Alpharetta, Georgia. Just a wonderful church family. But I did the adult class, and we brought in my friend of mine, Rosia Rojas McFadden from Texas, and she did our children's division training. And just a little side note, before we get into our teachers meeting, the key to growing Sabbath school, in my opinion, one of the major keys, along with how we teach and what we offer, is to have stronger children's ministries. We need children in our churches. We need to conduct our Sabbath schools in such a way that we can attract them, and attract the parents, because if we get the children, of course, we get the parents. So with that being said, this is our teachers meeting. And teachers meetings, they don't happen much, but I decided a long time ago, over 2 years ago, to have teachers meeting, and I just kept putting it off until last year. And we had such a good response that I promised I would do it again. And so this is what we're going to do. We are going to, my job is to help you to teach your class this coming Sabbath at church, okay? That's my role. This is not a Sabbath school class where we're going to go over Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday's lesson. As a Sabbath school teacher, my habit is to consume this quarterly, the author's notes, and then to put together an outline that I can then use to lead my class on Sabbath. So I'm going to share with you some insights that will help you, give you something to lead your class. So here's the three things, and I mentioned this in my previous video, letting you know there's three things that are necessary to have a successful adult Sabbath school class. Again, my specialty is not in children's ministry, but I know what I'm talking about with adult classes. Okay, hopefully my chicken scratch is not too bad tonight. These are the three things, and especially studying the book of Daniel. We want to provide good information that's biblically accurate, historically accurate, but that's not enough. As a Sabbath school teacher, I'm not just a history teacher. And no one is going to come out on Sabbath morning to hear me give a history lesson. I have to find a way to bring inspiration to what I'm doing. And we're going to talk about how you can do that for your class this week. Following that, We got to have interaction. We have to resist and move away from giving lectures or mini sermons where we're teaching our adult classes. There are too many classes where it's a mini sermon or a lecture. And if we do that, we will not attract a younger audience to our classes. And as I mentioned before, and I say quite often, with a bit of humor, but it's sadly true that in many of our churches, it is turned in, Sabbath school is just turned into senior citizen hour, where we just have senior citizens there because they've been doing it this way forever. So I want to encourage you to not to do that. So with that being said, let's kind of do a rehearser. For those of you who have followed me, this will make sense. Those of you who are just watching for the first time, your role as a Sabbath school teacher. I think when I did that this past weekend, someone said that looked like a shoe, but that's really supposed to be a plane, okay? This is your class. Imagine this is your class, and you have to take your class on a journey. That's what you're going to do. On Sabbath, you're going to take your class on a journey. You have to take them on a journey where you are going to land someplace that is relevant, with usable information, but along the way, you cannot get hijacked. By that, I mean you cannot have someone veer your lesson off to some place that you never intended to go. And many times in our classes, we have hijackers who are innocent. They don't mean any harm, but they just go off on tangents, or they just talk too long. And most of us only have 40, 45 minutes to cover our material. But there are some that come to our classes with an agenda that they want to talk about what they want to talk about. So we're going to talk about how to do that. So your job is to teach your class with maximum participation, which means as a Sabbath school teacher, you need your hands in the air. So let me just back up a little bit. Here's the question that you have to ask yourself. To be an effective teacher, I want you to ask yourself this question. How does this week's, we're on lesson number 2 from Jerusalem to Babylon, which we're really studying Daniel chapter 1. How does this week's lesson help the people in your class, besides giving them information? How does, when you're thinking about what you are going to talk about, how does this week's lesson help the people in your class? That has to be your question to yourself. And that's how you should drive your thoughts. Okay, can this really help the people? So I'm going to just share with you some ideas that you might want to use. The second thing is, don't try to cover too much. The book of Daniel covers a lot of information, and sometimes teachers try to cover everything. Just at the most, try to bring home 2 points. And if you just bring home 1 point really, really strong, hey, I'm all for it. I'm happy that you helped crystallize something, but don't feel like you have to cover everything, because if you cover too many points, chances are when you walk away, if you ask the people in your class, what was it that you guys really talked about today, no one can really put their finger on it. So try to kind of hone in on 1 or 2 points at the max that you're trying to cover. So I want to give you some insight that you can use for this week's lesson. And as we go from week to week, I'll share some things, some principles that I think you should try to use that I think will help you. And I see my good friend Ricky, who came out from Jasper, who came to our Sabbath school training in Alpharetta. It's good to see you, Ricky. And Jackie, if you're still on, It's wonderful to see your name pop up there from Arizona. We're photography friends from Ackworth. And Teresa, I see that you've joined. And Teresa, are you from Jamaica? I don't remember. But it's good to have you on. And for those of you who are watching later. So, Darlene, you're teaching this week. Ricky, are you teaching this coming Sabbath at your church? Let's see here. All right. Well, if you are, this should help you. So this week we're talking about Daniel per se. And because I taught last week, I taught during our sermon slot at our church. So I asked permission of the teacher who's teaching this week to allow me to dwell more on who Daniel was instead of just giving an overview of the book of Daniel, which is what lesson 1 was. So my notes from this past Sabbath are really about this Sabbath. So I'm going to share some ideas with you that will help you teach the class. And like I said, we'll go over some principles as we go through these series of lessons to kind of help you to hone your skills so you can be more effective. The 2 things I really want to stress is your material has to be inspirational, which means it's got to do more than just convey facts, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, I need hands in the air. You need hands in the air. When you start your Sabbath School class, you need hands in the air. And Sabbath School, for those of you who are new to this, Sabbath School should be driven by questions. That's how you should drive your Sabbath School class, by questions, not by statements. Even though you can make the statement quickly and say what has to be said, by doing that, you leave everyone out of the discovery process. So I want you to get in the habit of driving your discussion by asking questions. I'm going to share with you my top secrets of how I do that. But let's just talk about how you can get people's hands in the air to start. What type of questions? If you follow me and you've been to any of my classes, you know my secret is to ask a certain type of question. And the question that I use this past Sabbath, which you can use for this Sabbath, even though I started a little bit differently this week, but a question that you can use is one of the following, just to get hands in the air. Because I feel like the story of Daniel, the young man, and his friends is a story about a young man who was true to his principles. Okay, that is so loaded that we could spend our entire Sabbath School time on Sabbath talking about that one thing. But the story of Daniel as a young man is a story of a young man so committed to his principles that he would risk his life to follow them. Because if we read the story of Daniel chapter 1, he's in the setting, and from Isaiah, I think it is, chapter 24, where it talks about how they were carried in captivity, over 10,000 people, the children of Judah were taken away from Jerusalem, and how Daniel was in that number of 10,000. It doesn't say it in that particular verse, but he was in that number of people carried captive. And when you are carried captive, you are at the mercy of your captor. And yet Daniel was so committed to his principles. So the question, I have a bunch of questions around that, and I'm just going to throw them out. You can grab them and use them as you want, but I just want to give you some ideas. I would probably start this class the same way I have my notes, which is to say, class, today we're going to be talking about Daniel from Jerusalem to Babylon. And one of the things, class, that we're going to be talking about is this whole matter of being true to your principles. So class, notice how I'm going to word this. So class, when you hear the word principle, what does that word mean to you? That's how I would start my class discussion. And shut up. Someone's going to raise their hand and they're going to say, well, I think the word principle means X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to say, oh, that's great. Tell me a little bit more what you mean. They're going to expound on a little bit more. Even though they give me the perfect answer, I will then say, does anybody else want to share with me what does the word principle mean to them? Depending on the size of your class. You may have 4 people, 6 people, 20 people, 30 people. I don't really know. But depending on your size of your class, I'd ask, does anybody else want to share? I just need hands in the air. If you're like me, I already have the definition. I went on dictionary.com, as my habit is every time I teach, and I find a key word that I can throw out at the beginning of class so I can get hands in the air. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes talking about anything. I need hands in the air. After I do my little housekeeping, I need hands in the air because I need to be a successful class. I need interaction. So I'm not going to give them all the information. Say, class, I won't say, now listen, class, we're going to talk about the young man, Daniel, and his 3 companions. And they were men of principle. And to be principle means that you X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to do that. I'm asking the class, okay? So when they give me some answers, I'm on my journey. I got hands in the air. I've taken off, okay? So let me just give you some questions that you can use that I'm not going to give you in any particular order. But if you have not prepared for this week yet, here's some thoughts that that you can use to stimulate a discussion. Okay, I don't want you giving the answers. I want you to know the answer, anticipate the answer they're going to give, so you can have follow-up questions. That's the hardest thing for a teacher to learn. You imagine your class, you imagine asking the question, but then I want you to go a step further. Imagine what the answer will be, and then how you can follow up from the answers that you are likely to get. Okay, so let me give you some questions just for your notes that you may or may not want to use. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8 says he purposed in his heart. And we spend time on that. That's an easy one. I had to say, class, what does that mean that he purposed in his heart? Don't you tell them what it means. You ask them what it means, okay? And the next question, and some of this we did Sabbath at my church. So I know let me just pause and say, we did our Sabbath school during our 11 o'clock service where traditionally there's a sermon. And it was so much interaction. It was just beautiful. The most touching part of it was that during our interaction, we had visitors who were visiting at the church. I don't know if it was their first time. Some I'd never seen before. I've been going there about a year. But we had visitors who raised their hand on multiple times to participate. And the icing on the top was a young girl. I imagine, I'm bad at age, maybe she was 10 years old. And one of the questions on the floor was what does it mean to love God with all your mind, heart, and soul? And she raised her hand. She was a little bitty girl. I've seen her before. She goes there. And she gave such an eloquent, on the mark answer, which in itself was beautiful. but just to have the children and teenagers and visitors all dialed in where they were a part of the learning process is beautiful. And we're studying the Bible. We're not just rapping or shooting the breeze. So I just sidetracked myself. So let me give you some questions to answer. Oh, and I haven't even checked to see if anybody said anything. St. Lucia, Teresa, sorry about that. Okay, Christina, good to see you again. Yes, he didn't compromise. So that's a good one, Christina. You could start by saying, class, what does the word compromise mean to you? Okay, it gets you to the same point. Here's some other questions, which are there's almost synonymous with that thought. What does it mean? The purpose in his heart. What does that mean? Ask the class. Okay. How did he? This is a good one. This is you can go deep with this one. How did Daniel happen to have such resolve, such commitment to his principles that he would not compromise? How do you think he just got that when he arrived in Babylon? That the light bulbs went off and all of a sudden, okay, that's not the answer. You know what the answer is right now, and many of the people in your class will be happy to tell you that it probably, no, I shouldn't say probably. It was because he was taught that way as a child. So I would probably say someone would probably is going to quote, train up a child in the way he should go. So I would probably say, can I have a volunteer to read wherever that's found at, okay? And which is found in Proverbs 22:6. And I would ask the class, just it's not taking you off track of where you're trying to go, I would ask the class, so what does it really mean to train up a child in the way he should go? Class, does it mean that you should teach your children habits that they will stick to? Or is it more than that? That's a good question for a discussion. Okay? And for some reason, and using Christina's word, why he wouldn't compromise, what do you think his relationship with God was before he was taken captive? That's a good question also. Well, I got some more questions. I'm just going to give you a bunch of questions before we run out of time. And then as we go from week to week, we'll have more of a structured format. Okay, here I got another good question. If you're going to follow this line of argument. When we talk about Daniel as a man of his principles and he wouldn't compromise, what were those principles? What were the principles? Was it just don't eat meat that sacrifice to idols? Was that the principle? That's a deeper question that takes some time to unpack. But in our class this past Sabbath, we unpacked it, and I asked a volunteer to read a text, which is Matthew 22:34-40. Now, let me just mention this while I just mentioned that text. I'm going to give you the secret of an effective Sabbath school class. And I have to apologize because I assume that many people, I see the familiar names, and I know that we all done this together. But I have to remember that there's some people who are watching this for the first time, and I want to just kind of be clear with them as I am with you guys. When I teach Sabbath school, I read every word in the week's lesson. I read every word in the week's lesson. I do mine online. I use ssnet.org because that's just my habit. I can click on all the hyperlinks and get right to the text and get right to the Spirit of Prophecy quotations. Okay, and then I find the theme of what speaks to me from what everything that I've read throughout the week. Something will speak to me that doesn't necessarily speak to you, okay? The reason I'm telling you this is because I am a stickler on this, and many of you know this already. I want you to study this thoroughly, and any information that you can tie to whatever the theme is you come from this. And I'll talk about the theme more on another session. When you teach on Sabbath, this is all I want you to use. That's it. This is it. I'm pausing for effect. When you teach the lesson on Sabbath, I don't want you to say Monday's lesson. Okay, so read Tuesday's lesson. The way I phrase it is that study the lesson all week. Come up with an outline. I'll help you come up with your outline. But when you get out of your car or your Uber or your Lyft or the bus, no, don't leave it on the bus and don't leave it in the car. Just don't bring it in the church. Love it, but I don't want you to use it as a crutch. I want you to teach with your Bible only. The greatest joy for me as a Sabbath school teacher is to see us opening our Bibles as a church family. Many of the people that's come to your classes and many of the people that come to church, because of whatever reason, often go through an entire week without opening their Bibles. That's just a reality. I'm not judging people. I'm just stating a reality. And we as Sabbath school teachers have the opportunity to share the word of God with people who haven't, for whatever reason, considered it all week long. That's a privilege, an honor, and something that we should not waste an opportunity, okay? So I'm a real stickler on that. And I'm telling you, for those of you who are hesitant to do it, I'm telling you it is another level of connection that you cannot get by just reading Sunday, Monday, Tuesday's lesson, okay? I want you to keep in mind that there's a chance, depending on the size of your church where you're located in, but my mindset is that there's always going to be a visitor, always. And I want to teach in a way that a visitor could join in on the discussion. So before we get out of here, and I have a few more questions for you to share, I'm going to give you the steps that I want you to take so you can have a Bible-based discussion. Okay, Christina, that's a good question. How can you get people out of the habit of reading day by day? Now, if you're speaking about the teachers, you should invite them to this training. The people at home, that's what we want them to do. But the teachers, unfortunately, is so ingrained in how we do Sabbath school that your best bet is to just have them join our class. That's the best thing we can do. But I want to give you a way to do that. And as you follow along this quarter, you'll see that this works. Your testimony will be, man, that works. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask a question. And this should be familiar to Ricky and Christina, some of you. I want you to ask a question. Then I want you to not answer your own answer, your own question. I want you to get answers, plural. Even if you hear the first question answered correctly the first time, I still want to say, even if somebody gives you the perfect answer, I still want you to say, does anybody else want to share with me what they think about that? Then here's the step. This is how you can teach with your Bible only. The next thing I want you to do, because you've already studied and you have an outline, you've asked a question, you've got some some responses. Then I want you to ask for a volunteer to read a text that you've already predetermined. Okay, this is important. Watch this. Okay. I want you to ask for a volunteer. I don't want you to read the text, because some people will say, hey, I'll read. That might be all they do, but they feel they were a part of it. When they read the text, here's the most important thing I'm going to share with you tonight. So let's imagine it's Daniel 1, verse 8. Okay. So we're talking about principles, so. And I say, can I get a volunteer to read for me Daniel 1:8? And there might be a little pause, but I'm not going to read it. So we're just going to pause till I get a volunteer, and someone will always bail you out. My church now is a sweet lady who bails us out. And I remember at my last church, Sister Marilyn, who unfortunately passed unexpectedly last year, she was the person who she was ready to read if we needed someone to read. Beautiful person. But let's say I get a volunteer to read Daniel 1:8. And it says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. My very next question must be, can only be taken from this text. I don't know how you're going to phrase it. It can be, well, class, what does it mean that Daniel purposed in his heart? Why do you think Daniel asked the prince of the eunuchs? Whatever it is, this text that you read must be the basis of your next question. You're taking them on a journey through their Bibles. You've already plotted the path. You already know what answers they're probably going to give you. So when you say, well, class, what does this mean that he purposed in his heart? Okay. Then you're going to get some answers from people. Well, I think that means so-and-so. We talked about this earlier this afternoon. After we exhaust that, I will then have another text that I'll say, class, okay, great. I think this next text might give us a little bit more insight into this. Can I get a volunteer to read Matthew 25:25? I'm just picking something at random. When the volunteer reads that, it is now the basis of my next question. Class, what does this text show us about whatever we're talking about? What does this text tell us about whatever we're talking about? What does this text reveal, suggest, mean, imply? I just need to have it based on that text. Here's the beautiful thing, that as you're a teacher, you might not realize the people that are in your class who may not have read their Bibles at all, or have never read a Bible, or just visiting, are now looking down at that page, trying to understand what that means. That's a beautiful thing. Don't take that for granted. That's a beautiful thing to see people who are in unison trying to understand, really, well, what does Matthew 25:25 mean? That's a great thing to do. Okay, so you do that 3 or 4 times, you ask the question. Don't answer your own questions. Don't be that type of teacher where you ask such sophomoric questions that, there's no thought to it. I don't mind you starting with a simple question, but give the people something to think about. Okay, and of course, if you need my help throughout the week, you can always send me a message. Share this meeting. This is only the first for this quarter, so we're in lesson number 2. It's January, February, March. Again, we're studying the book of Daniel, and as we go throughout each session, I'll share some more tips and insight that I know can help you as a teacher. The number one promise as a teacher that I claim, that I really encourage you to claim as a teacher. This is not something that we should feel like because I have this amount of Bible knowledge, I can be the teacher. That's not a safe position to be in as a teacher. Or because I've been doing this so long, I can do this. This is a spiritual thing we're doing. And regardless of how much knowledge you have, you should be asking God for help on teaching the Bible. The number one promise that I claim as a Sabbath school teacher, or whenever I'm speaking in front of a church, is James 1:5. And I'm just going to read James 1:5. I quote it all the time, and everyone knows James 1:5, but I just want to read it. This is the promise that I claimed last week. Some of you know that I told you already about my next assignment is in the Bahamas. I'll do an entire weekend, and then after that, I'm back in Georgia, where I'll do first service, Sabbath school, second service, and an afternoon workshop at another church. And I need God's help to make that happen. To be able to provide inspiration, I need God's help. Here's the promise. It says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, which giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, or doesn't hold back, and it shall be given him. That's the promise I claim. Lord, I don't have the wisdom to do this. This is not in me to do this. Help me to understand what I'm reading. Help me to convey it. I'm praying that the people that come out on Sabbath will be receptive to your word, and help me to live my life in such a way that I could be a conduit for teaching your word. That's my prayer for myself, and I pray that's my prayer for you. Let me know how your class went, Darlene, this coming Sabbath. And on next Thursday, 9 p.m., same place, same back channel, I'll be here, and we'll do the next week's lesson. Invite someone, share this video with someone, for adult class teachers. We really just want to do better in 2020, okay? With that being said, I want to just wish you all a safe evening, and that God will bless you in all your endeavors and keep you and your loved ones safe. Everyone have a good night.